Hello and welcome everyone to our groundbreaking journey under this year's theme, Art, Afrofuturism, and Geography, Designing an Equitable and Feminist Future. I'm Clinton Johnson. I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the Executive Director for the North Star of GIS. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today, where we're going to embark on a journey through Afrofuturism, data, and the transformative power of Black higher education. This month, we're hosting a series of weekly conversations with artists, geothinkers, and innovators. Our conversations will focus on imagining and creating tangible pathways toward a world where equity, feminism, and Black prosperity are realities. Today, we embark on our journey to explore, create, and lead the way to an equitable feminist future. Now, guiding our conversation today, there are five dynamic concepts. There's essence, understanding the foundational principles of Afrofuturism and its relation to data and technology. There's imagining, visualizing possibilities and aspirations for an equitable, feminist, and anti racist tech landscape. Designing, discussing active participation in creating tech solutions. There's shaping, exploring the role of Black higher education in influencing tech futures. And last but definitely not least, there is power, understanding the impact of storytelling and representation in tech innovation. These inspiring and action oriented concepts form the backbone of our conversation and are crucial to crafting a future that honors and uplifts every single member of our global community. And now I have the honor of introducing Dr. Natasha McClendon, a distinguished and influential figure in the educational policy and research space. Currently, Natasha is making significant strides as a senior research associate at UNCF's Frederick D. Patterson Research Institute, contributing to the longitudinal study for the Student Freedom Initiative. Her expertise in data analysis and research was previously demonstrated in her role as the community data and research analyst, where she emphasized the importance of evidence-based decisions in community development. Natasha's involvement in field research, particularly under the SCOPE study, highlights her commitment to understanding the impacts of educational initiatives on middle school students. With a master's degree in sociology from the American University and having earned her PhD in educational policy studies at Georgia State University, Natasha's research provides valuable insights into the experiences of Black college students, particularly in the STEM fields. Her work delves into crucial areas such as STEM retention, the efficacy of support systems, performance based funding, and overall student success. Natasha's dedication to honoring Black intellectual traditions through her research in higher education and the experiences of Black students aligns seamlessly with our conversation's theme. Her insights are not only anticipated to be enlightening, but are also expected to guide us toward a future where Black communities and students are empowered through data, through technology, and through education. So join me in welcoming Dr. McClendon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for that introduction, and I will try to live up to that promise that you gave me in the introduction.
No doubt you will. So I'm just going to get right into it. Dr. McClendon, how do you see Afrofuturism shaping our understanding of data and technology in Black communities?
So, I think when I think of Afrofuturism, I think of books that I love reading, like titles by Octavia Butler, and how time is in those literative works, fictive works, it's not linear, right? So we are in the past, we are in the present, and we are in the future in everything that we do. And so I think that is really indicative of Black culture when you see like we're always thinking about who came before us, we're thinking about how they inform our present, and we're thinking about how that's informing what we want to produce for the future. And one of my mentors, um, Dr. Hazel Simonet used to always say there are people from the future who are calling your name. And so it's always like a reminder that somebody is going to look back on what you are doing now. And they're calling you to be who you are now so you can do those things that are moving us into this future that we're imagining. And so, what I really think of in terms of Afrofuturism is a way of imagining, a way of holding what we imagine, that's counter to the futures that other people might create for us and tell us are our place to inhabit in the future.
Yeah, that resonates with me so much, and, the reality that, um, not only is someone calling to us, either from the past or the future, we are always constantly the future that someone else was imagining, right? Um, and simultaneously, and I think this was maybe what that point really means is we're always simultaneously the foundation that someone in the future needs. So why not now? And I've found myself getting on these rants lately about how we need a bold vision for technology for Black communities, one that goes beyond tech resistance, standing up against all of these efforts that harm Black folks in tech spaces or the ways in which technology harms Black folks. We need to go past diversity and inclusion in tech. So even as we face resistance to DEI and belonging and justice initiatives that organizations are working on, just trying to create more welcoming spaces where people from all backgrounds can grow. We can't be deterred by those things. We have to transform the tech landscape into one that really embraces Black people as tech creators, owners, and innovators. We got to go beyond digital literacy, and I think whenever when I think about some of the Afrofuturism works that I've been exposed to, um, you know, tech literacy is the baseline in many of those works. They are imagining spaces and ways in which Black folks are at the center of defining how technology changes the future and how it shapes the way that we respond to the events of the day. So, we a part of why we pulled this conversation together is that we really believe that we need Afrofuturism today. And a lot of what you shared really makes me, um, really resonates with our thoughts and feelings on this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but
So I was just going to also say that I think when we think about tech literacy, digital literacy, there may be a difference between um, thinking of tech companies, organizations, institutions versus tech, the thing. So, like the ability to use tech is different than what tech companies might see as tech literacy. So, when TikTok, Snap, Vine, YouTube come out, there are plenty of Black creators who are at the forefront of making those into these behemoths that they are now in tech. They wouldn't be there without those creators. So the literacy is evident. But I think what happens a lot of times is that whatever literacy that Black communities hold in those spaces, or whatever authority they might have in those spaces based on giving those types of tech the foundation that they have and the currency and the relevancy that they have is downgraded. They're not really given credit for that. And so you can't say, in my opinion, that people don't have tech literacy if they're starting businesses with their phone. Some people only know how to start a business if it's tech, if it's brick and mortar. If I can start a business on my phone that can then support my family, I have tech literacy, I have digital literacy. Whether I know how to, reset a router may not be the most important type of literacy I need to have. So I think it's giving credit where credit is due and also acknowledging that there's so much innovation that is evident in Black communities just by their presence on the app. Like all these skits, all these different, like you have people who are coming up with whole production companies as a result of being on an app.
right.
And then they create knowledge, they create content, and then evolve and scale. So they're not only literate in, digital literacies, but also business literacy, financial literacy as a result of being a leader in this tech literacy. And so I think it's like we're not necessarily trying to go somewhere else. We are already there and already at the forefront of those things. And if we weren't there, the company wouldn't be what it was. But then they come back and say, like, well, you're you're not coding in this specific way, or but you're spending hours and hours editing, learning how to teach yourself how to edit videos. That is a highly sought skill set. But they're not saying, I want to go work as an editor for your company. And so I think that's the difference in how do we pull that, parse that apart to acknowledge what greatness, innovation, forward thinking, futurist thinking already exists.
Absolutely. And maybe in some cases, someone has said, "Oh, I would love to do, video editing for a company, but they don't respect my skills." Or in those spaces, the toxicity is so high that, you know, I don't find myself prospering. We might actually do a video series based on a lot of the comments that folks say to us about what it's like to be Black in STEM fields, or what it's like to be Black um, in geo fields in particular. One of those sort of I'm Black in geo, and so of course I experienced X, Y, or Z, and we compiled a list. And when I think about just for our organization, the effort to pull something off like that, and when we reflect on all of these folks who you're alluding to right now, who have taken TikTok, taken Twitter, taken Instagram, taken YouTube, and turned it into the way that they, um, not just the way they survive, but the way they thrive. Um, and and many of them are Black women. And when I think about this next question, like what is an equitable feminist and anti-racist tech landscape look like to you, and how do we begin to visualize it? I feel like, you've already started to allude to it in some ways. um, we are there, our presence is there, but is it always respected beyond the ability that we have to make people laugh or feel entertained? But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just saw a clip that in which a black woman was saying like black women's businesses are the most founded but the least funded. And so, and she was on a panel, but I'm sorry, I can't remember where it was, but she was saying this recently, and it has me thinking in terms of this conversation that there are so many black women who are supporting black families um, through this knowledge base in which they create their businesses to sustain themselves, to maybe even be able to like opt out of some lower paying jobs or supplement jobs that aren't given enough. And I mean, I'm not even saying like that is, working in retail. It could be working in a regular industry at this point. A lot of us are supplementing income with lots of different skill sets on a regular basis. So I think is thinking about how do we give credit to the people who are giving relevancy to the technology that's been developed and actually not try to, pay them in exposure. But if you have so much money to pay for the engineers who create the app, then you probably also have funding that you can use to support the people who make your app relevant or your
Mm,
technology relevant. So I think it's really being more inclusive, holistic, and probably for that industry radical in who and how you compensate folks who are contributing to the innovation of this technology. Because I think a lot of the time people see the creators as just, something that's free. So yeah, maybe we pay you a little bit, maybe we give you some exposure, maybe we send you some free stuff, but they're not bringing them into the process. Say, how did you come up with these ideas? How did you even think to use this app to do this thing? Do you have people who are getting their news from the app? Somebody had to think, I'm going to read the news, give you know, bite-sized clips of the news to people so they can be aware of what's going on in the world. When you look at, current conflicts in Sudan, Palestine, Egypt, Syria, like people are presenting that news through TikTok. So somebody had to be innovative to say, yes, this is an app where people were dancing when it first came out. But now it's a way for us to show and share information very quickly to millions and millions of people, where before that wasn't even something that, I doubt TikTok was thinking about that when they created
Right,
the app.
exactly. And yet, the Zuckerbergs and the Musks of the world are sitting back, reaping the billions. They're the ones being called to the interviews and being seen as the innovators of our future for creating these base platforms that other folks have really built on top of and in some ways built innovations despite limitations of the tools. Um, yeah, a lot of times in our mission work with North Star, we talk about promoting Black representation and trying to make it clear that when we say that, we aren't saying that we're not there. Um, we're saying promoting Black representation. So that means promoting the folks who are there already. Very often, in and across data, text, STEM more broadly, GIS in particular, geography in particular, you'll have folks who are sometimes the most knowledgeable about a topic or issue and the least likely to be called upon to bring their perspectives to light, perhaps unless it's Black History Month. So these are the kind of things that I feel like we have to push the industry beyond, and maybe it's about using these continuing to leverage these platforms, whatever platforms reveal themselves, build our own where we can, but build platforms on the platforms and drive our own agenda without necessarily waiting for the tech landscape to welcome us in that sort of way. So to the to the place you got us really quickly. These tech entrepreneurs on social media apps, building out the way in which media news is communicated, the way in which information moves across the planet, not just taking pictures of the breakfast, lunch, and dinner that they had, or the cute little brunch, but conveying imagery that's about changing hearts and minds and revealing the truths of what's going on in the world. Maybe it's just us continuing to lean into those spaces and support others who are already doing that, promoting that representation that's already there.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that in a lot of different ways, speaking to like the equitable feminist future of like people doing food justice work. I have friends who are a big part of that. I have friends who are creating spaces, community spaces, but they are on some of these social media apps and in person around communal like study of literature and book reading. And then there are folks who are talking about financial literacy and how to save, starting like with really basic things like how do you save money for Christmas shopping so it's not catching you by surprise. How do you budget for, chefs getting on telling you how to budget nutritious meals in an economy where everything is more expensive, but there are a lot of things that people are doing with this wealth of knowledge that's underrated and undervalued.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't actually, I was in a conversation earlier today where we were talking about how TikTokers are very often the source for Black history education, all year long. Not just this month, but all year long. Um, but they're also the source for a wide range of education that we don't often get in our public schools, like financial literacy and the like, and not just the crazy relationship advice that I see on social media as well. You said another thing too that I thought was really compelling. There are folks who are building, whole production um, organizations and folks who are feeding into each other. I've been watching a lot of Black TikTokers who are comedians and actors and writers who feed into each other's production work. They're doing videography for each other. They're acting in each other's skits. They're writing for each other, and um, they're all around building sort of like a community based hub of entrepreneurialism in the tech industry. And I wonder to what degree, um, you know, they understand that they are becoming tech giants in a way. They are the reasons why we go to social media very often, and I would love to see them really recognized for that.
And I think to your point, there's probably like way more than the ones that we know as being the most popular, like Issa Rae or Kev on stage and some of the others. But it's it's like that mindset, I think, once again, that's like not at the forefront of these conversations about tech innovation and scaling and creating space where there was not one created for you, but using this and leveraging this in a really smart, innovative way to get to the point that you want to get to, because some of these industries are really hard to break into. But I remember watching Awkward Black Girl on YouTube in
Right,
the early 2010s, and it was just, and there are so many other, Black and Sexy TV was another one where they were just all of their production, all of the actors in the shows, writers, they're doing a little bit of everything, but they were rolling them into multiple shows and giving people opportunities to really break in an industry where it's really hard to break in, but it also employing a lot of Black people, which is something that the tech companies cannot say that they're doing.
right, right. Um, and just continue to move the conversation forward and towards designing. Um, in your view, how can Black communities become more involved in actively shaping and creating tech solutions?
So I think in my experience of working with data in communities, I think there's still like this idea that they're not involved. But I remember, now I will say, like, some people are tired. Like, they're tired of people coming into the community, doing research on them, and then telling them what they're going to do for them after they've done that research on them without any of their input. And that's valid. But I think when we were doing community with people, there were projects that they came up with because, for one, they knew what they needed. But when we presented, like, here are some of the possible solutions, what are your thoughts? Some of the things they push back, and it's like, that's not a solution because that's not how the system works. So one example is, like, if you're thinking about energy assistance, the thought and the narrative is like, you're being, if you're low income or you can't afford your energy bill, you're being very irresponsible by waiting until you're like 2 months behind to ask for help. When in reality, the way most government systems work, you have to be 2 months behind before they will even
Yeah,
grant you any of the assistance. And so people become adept at navigating that system, which is completely antithetical to how it will work if you were just paying your bill regularly and didn't need assistance, right? So it creates these two like antithetical worlds that they're navigating. So then when you have like a solution, when you say, how are we creating and actively shaping solutions? They are always actively shaping solutions with the technology they have, with the knowledge they have for the situation that they are in. And so the difference is, sometimes when we present this data about other things that may be available or possible, and then work together to see, does it really address the issue and create a solution, we might have had an idea of what we think would be the best solution, but they say, for us, this is a solution. We want to have like a different kind of approach to the way housing is distributed. Um, we don't want our communities broken up in these ways of, redistributing concentrated poverty or wealth, where you have mixed use housing developments where inevitably there are only like, a handful, if any, affordable housing. So how do we think about it differently, because we've already lived that reality and we know that that's not the solution, but sometimes things are presented as solutions even though we know they don't work. So I think that long-winded way of saying, like, I think it's a reframing of seeing what solutions that people in communities are already creating. Same thing with Black women creating all these businesses. They're creating the businesses to create a solution for a need or a gap that they've already analyzed using like business acumen. You look at the current landscape and say something is missing. I can fill that gap. Here's how I'm going to do it, and then they create the thing. So they are, Black people have always been doing these things. And I think even I was doing a research project and looking at um, how we think of Black creation and the idea that we don't have a history, an accurate history of what Black people created because the patents weren't in their name.
Mm.
So we've always been creating things and not getting credit for those things. And we can't even possibly know how many of those things we created accurately. So there's so many ways that we are actively adjusting in real time, creating solutions with the technology we have. And technology spans a lot of things. It's like from rudimentary technology that, like a cup is technology, right?
Right.
But also code is technology. So we're always at every point. If you have a job, any job, you're always using technology to solve a problem, whatever that is. And so I guess once again, realizing that we're always doing that every single day, whether it's DEI, a social issue, or a tangible issue, you know?
Right. And yeah, you said something that just struck me. Like we're always creating, even in some of the spaces where it's toxic for us, and sometimes the ways in which it's toxic for us have become normalized. Like we may think, I mean, how many people have had the experience? Let me know in the audience if you have the experience where you have an idea, the idea should be leveraged, but you know that if you share the idea, it'll be minimized or diminished. And so, how often have you gotten really clever at working the system and getting that person from a dominant group to present the idea, so that just so a community can be better served or the work can go more smoothly. I remember I had a situation at the city of Philadelphia. It's been long enough since I worked here to mention things like this, but um, I led my team to create a set of web services to be consumed by the public, and this hadn't been done yet. And um, we were deciding to hire our first chief data officer, and so they select the person. Actually helped choose this person. They were going to go with someone else. I recommended this guy, and my CIO asked if we could delay the release of our web services until the new chief data officer started. And I was like, okay, sure. I guess that makes sense. Let's line up these announcements. And so when he started, um, and then we released that solution, while I was excited to give credit to Andrew Moon, who worked so hard to make that happen. All the credit somehow went to this guy, and it just made sense to the city and to folks around the city and to folks who gave the new office awards for things that somehow, as soon as he started, he was able to deliver a sophisticated product like that. And so I wonder just how many times folks have taken that hit, have been the creator, not just in terms of the patents. And we've had a conversation in past sessions, um, a few years back uh, at Here Technologies. They do. We have folks on, and they were talking about how they do quite a bit to make sure that employees can get patents. And so several of the folks who were on the webinar was sharing how they had patents, but many other organizations don't do that sort of thing. Um, they're eager to quote unquote apply credit to the organization, but you always see someone standing forward, actually taking the credit. So, yeah, we need to make sure that in our design of the future that we are creating pathways to clearly give credit where credit is due, and that might be a big theme that we've been touching on this whole conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, yeah, we see some folks commenting in the chat. Um, and yeah, feel free for the great team behind the scenes to keep sharing with the folks on the chat or Sam. But on shaping, how pivotal is the role of Black higher education in influencing and molding the future of technology?
Let's say, are you saying like HBCUs specifically or Black people in higher education?
Hmm. Yeah, this is a really good question. How would you, how I often think about when we say our audience, we say Black students, educators, entrepreneurs, and professionals. And when I say, when I'm talking about Black educators, in a nuanced way, I'm thinking about Black educators, so Black folks who are educators. I'm also thinking about educators who are educating in predominantly Black spaces, who are not always Black, even at HBCUs. I say even, but at HBCUs as well. Um, but I had an opportunity to spend time at the UNCF um, driven conference, Unite. And I felt like I got a different perspective on Black higher education. And honestly, I would love for you to try to set the frame for us on in a UNCF context. What is Black higher education?
Yeah, so at UNCF, we frame it in regards to the HBCU effect. And so that's how do HBCUs affect students, their surrounding communities, those students' families, those alumni who attended the institution. And some of the ways that we have recently thought about this is social mobility. So, how adept are HBCUs at moving students from the bottom 40% in social mobility to the top 60%? Another way that we've studied recently is workforce alumni relationships for students that have attended HBCU. So what that means is how are students socialized as a part of their HBCU experience to enter into the workforce? What does that look like in terms of frameworks for mentoring at HBCUs? So HBCUs are different from PWIs in that mentorship is a community endeavor. And so you usually hear about, oh, you are at Bennett, you have a Bennett Bill. That's like a sophomore or a junior who knows the lay of the land and they're assigned to a freshman. This is, at Morehouse, a lot of schools have this. And so it's not just, faculty's position to mentor all the students. It is students' position to mentor students. Some of the people you go to classes with who know something you don't are going to mentor you and build relationships with you from organizations, the people in your dorm, your roommate, the staff members. I think it's more, as someone who attended a PWI for undergrad, like, of course, I thought, the woman who I see every time I scan my card at the dining hall, she's important to me. But I think at a HBCU, it's definitely like they can mentor you just as much as the faculty can mentor you. And that's accepted. Versus in my experience at a PWI, it's like, yes, I have an experience with them, but do other white students respect them? Other students from other groups respect them equally? I don't know. Like, I think maybe they're thinking faculty mentor me. Nobody else tells me what to do. But at HBCU, it's like whole community, just like, when you hear the stories of my dad telling me when I was outside, everybody sitting on their front porch could tell me, oh, you're in trouble now. You shouldn't be doing that. That's what the experience from our study was showing, that at HBCU, this is how the mentorship is widely enacted. And so when you are thinking about how you're socialized to go into a working environment, your understanding of how you understand information, where you get information, where you can receive wisdom from to apply to how you are thinking of solutions to problems might be shaped by understanding that everybody has something to teach you instead of just one person holding all of that power to shape what you learn in that environment. And I think for some of the other studies, like punching above their weight, we are seeing like how HBCUs had oversized impact in terms of creating Black professionals that go on to graduate school. Either they're going to PWIs that enter into certain professions like law, medicine, and engineering. That a lot of those students are going to HBCUs first and then entering into these other spaces. And so I think there's so much that they are doing um, for students of color broadly and specifically Black students um, much better than other institutions. And once again, they're not given that credit and they're not given that funding. But I think from the perspective of like thinking of like Black educators in total, I think they are doing that work in their institutions and
Mm,
maybe the only one doing that work in their institutions with that framing and that framework, and have to create, or sometimes burdened with trying to create those types of communities in a place that is not always going to have that community resource. And so yeah, and so I
I'm
think that, go ahead.
I was gonna say, just as I was about to say how, I see what the point you're trying to make. When I think about how, students from early career professionals from HBCUs versus early career professionals from PWIs, from my 25 years in the tech space, they just move different. They move so different, and I think that a part of it is if you have gone not only if you have gone it's not just about if you've gone the PWI route for college for colleges, if you have gone a PWI route since you were in grade school, and every place you've ever spent time, every institution that you've ever spent time in, significant time, even for, part-time jobs to high school, middle school, elementary school, if all of these have been PWIs, there's a way that that Black folks in those spaces move, particularly those folks who present quote unquote more Black than others, right? Folks who are less able to pass, they move different. They move, I won't say with a sense of fear, um, but they seem to feel like they understand the system so well that they anticipate, um, barriers and are less likely to confront them in the same way sometimes. When I've, paid attention to this is just, like, looking at people across the North Star community, folks who have mixed between these spaces, who've had a little bit of both, um, they seem to push up against those barriers a little bit more, and when I think about HBCU students, sometimes it is as if, at least initially, it is as if those barriers don't exist, and even when they emerge, they they move past them in ways that I can't quite put a finger on, and I would love to see if somebody has done any studies on this. Now, ultimately, we all will be confronted with a moment of bias, a structure in the system that may even just be one person who consistently has power over a decision, or a small team of people that consistently have power over a decision, and that creates a stumbling block for anyone, but that we have to figure out how to interrupt. But uh, very often um, when I encounter HBCU students, particularly from some institutions, I won't name them, they move very different through spaces. They have a confidence that's probably born out of being in spaces that have nurtured you to be confident, to understand your full potential versus being, quote unquote, nurtured in a toxic way in spaces that have, in some way or another, mostly subtle, but maybe also some very overt, direct ways, told you that you weren't the one. You're not the one. Somebody else is the one, um, and encourages you to take a back seat because you have all those things will give you much more imposter syndrome. Maybe it's if I had to boil it down to something that people understand in a sort of like a um, a white institution context, imposter syndrome, if we labeled it that way, is something that we get more of, we develop more of, the more we're in white institutions, and it seems like spaces like HBCUs, um, you'll find yourself with less of that.
Well, one thing
Um,
that we did see from the study is that HBCUs form a network. So, for example, you have the school itself, and then you have folks who are alumni of that school, but then you have folks who are like, oh, you went to a HBCU, I went to a HBCU. So then there's a network at HBCUs, but then it ripples out in terms of like, oh, I had an advisor that went to a HBCU. So she has kind of brought me into the fold, and then she introduces me to other people who are in that space. And then I become part of that network. but you don't see that replicated in the same way for PWIs. So I think it also can extend and have some of the positive effects, but I also say, everybody's experiences aren't perfect. But I liken it to the difference between if you have a lot of siblings or, cousins and you're growing up, you
Mm,
might fight each other, but ultimately you love each other. So you learn how to reconcile conflict between each other, and that strengthens your skill set too. Versus someone outside of your family, it's like you might have someone picking on a sibling. You say, I can pick on them, you can't pick on them.
right,
So
right.
I think in some ways it can create like this insider outsider effect in a positive way where they're going to be confident about what they can accomplish even if they had like some tough situations where they felt like they were challenged or it was stressful, they still feel like it was for their good and that they're going to ultimately be successful because of that.
Great. Um, I mean, we're having a conversation as we were supposed to, but we do have to get to the audience Q&A, and I'm just going to start the audience Q&A with our question on power. So, can you share some thoughts on the impact of storytelling and representation in tech innovation, especially for Black communities? And you can um, focus that through whatever lens you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, we're always enacting storytelling. So I think because we have to, like, I think it's always been from whether it's from the perspective of this country or where we were before that, and people who are in Black diasporic traditions who are coming from other countries now, it's always this kind of thread that I've seen of like, how are we telling our story about what we're doing, where we're contributing, where we're coming from, and thinking about how that ties into where we're going next. So I think it's something that we see, harkening back to the earlier conversation around social media. People are always telling a story, whether it's a true story, a fictional story, a story to engage you in the content. It's always something that's being done, stories around inventions and innovation, around what that even looks like when I'm thinking about, a lot of storytelling around a story around the movie, the film by uh, Duvernay Origin. There's been like a lot of um, storytelling around like how do we even tell this story of what it means to be like in this cast, in these systems that are divisive, in or stories about from Issa Rae about like how do we even work together, what does it mean for us to work together, and changing this complete narrative of like what does collaboration look like and what is the value of collaboration, of like not always trying to, if you're a filmmaker, hit up Eva DuVernay and say, like, I just want to work with you. But like, who is it that who's wanting to do film editing and directing and acting that you could work with now? And so I think we're always in this process of storytelling and innovating through storytelling, because that's always been something, that's been part of our skill set, background, and a necessity for us to know who we are.
Yeah. Oh, let's pick at that necessity piece a little bit while we wait for questions. Um, and you're saying this, but not saying this. Um, we need to because other people will tell a completely different story about us. We need to because other people will tell us a story that is totally erroneous, and um, and we can be exposed to those stories so consistently that we start to adopt those stories and make those stories our own. Um, and I don't think I understood the importance of that in movement work as much as I did until, of course, I got into, um, more movement work, started a nonprofit, started doing work at the NACP, got engaged with folks like yourself, and seeing how important it is to um, have a narrative that corrects the narratives, have a narrative that helps people see us or see themselves through the right kind of angle from the right perspective so he can understand not just the challenges and the barriers, but the opportunities that come from being able to overcome, a barrier or a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like even those narratives that are like, I guess not specific to um well, no, that's a lie. Let's say like Black experience, but I think it is tied to it. But I was thinking about, and I think about this a lot working with STEM students, is like when I was really young, my parents always had us, me and my siblings, like doing math workbooks at home, doing math projects, science projects. And when I was in school, I would be ahead in math and science. I did honors classes on a college track to take the courses, ahead of schedule, taking AP chemistry in high school. But it was at some point where, you start taking more standardized tests and they're saying, well, girls are not good at science, so you have to overcompensate, or girls are not good at math, so you have to overcompensate. By the time I got into undergrad at a private institution that was highly selective, I was like, I'm not good at science. I'm terrible at science. And I
Mm,
waited to take my math class until like my senior year because I was avoiding it. And it it just continues to make me think back on like how this story that somebody told me about myself that wasn't true, but that I then embodied shifted like all of my aspirations even at college, where I was thinking like, oh, I want to be a psychologist. But then I thought, oh, you can't be, I was a psychology major and I finished as a psychology major, but I was like, you can't be a psychologist because you're not good at math and science. And you're not good at science, you're not good at neuroscience, which you need for psychology. So you should just switch your major or, do something else. And when I work with STEM students, that's why it has been so important to me to kind of figure out how to holistically support them. And some of the things that have been so integral to their success is the um, the support of hearing them in their insecurities, in these stories that people are telling them that are making them insecure about their abilities, and really understanding how we can disrupt that and share our experiences to disrupt that so that they understand that you are hearing these things, but they're not actually true because you have proven through everything that you have achieved that that isn't true. It's not reality. There's no evidence to support it. And even when you look at the evidence around STEM achievement, student success, a lot of people don't do well in undergrad. But if they're not weeded out and they're allowed to make it to graduate classes, they succeed and excel. Even if they had a C average in undergrad, they have a 4.0 in grad school. Because by then, people assume you do know what you're doing here.
mhm. Very
So I
true.
think that's just really important.
Yeah, I hear Jack Dangerman, founder of ESRI. This is the only context in which I'm going to talk about um, Esri. Not that there isn't great things about Esri. Anyway, he often will tell people that he wasn't a great student. He wasn't a great student when he was going to Harvard, and I'm not sure. And I think he understands that being a student athlete was helpful. He feels like they were letting just anybody in Harvard at the time. Sometimes when he tells the story, but I was hearing that and realizing how um, people let him not be great and still supported him. And when he found the thing that was important to him, he was able to flourish in that space. And so often, for our communities, the opposite happens. People are the folks who are around us who should be nurturing us are anticipating our failures. And when they see the slightest indication of that, um, they are discouraging, disparaging, and these are the kind of things that happen in PWIs of all kinds, not just schools, but in PWIs of all kinds. And a part of what we need to do is envision a way past that. I see that there's a question in the chat, and I'll transition to it. So, considering hip hop and its global value, I guess, what do we think? um, or what other innovations from our community may be coming up next? I think we already started talking about one. I think we have innovated in social media in ways that others just haven't. Um, and then you see other people flourishing with that. But what are some of your thoughts on our next innovations or the next innovations coming from our community?
I mean, I guess I don't know how to answer that question because I don't know what all of them are. I think I guess I'm wondering like if the question is to ask like what will have global value next.
Mm,
I'm not sure because I think some of the things I see have the potential to have global value when you're talking about like water filtration systems. There are young children who are creating new techniques to suture that can save people's lives. There are people who are creating new techniques in education to like you could say Gracie's Corner is a new
mm.
innovation in like how are we teaching children in a culturally relevant manner to learn the basics of education, fundamental phonetics, um, and reading. So I think it just depends on what what you see as having global value and what you see as a significant enough innovation. But I think the short answer is that we are continually innovating. So I think it's just learning more about what people are doing and what's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, adding to that point, um, I think sometimes the more we get excited about the things that we do, the more attention we bring to it. And if a part of what the question is getting to about hip hop um, is that it has communicated across so many different cultures. I mean, you see rap battles in so many different languages
Mhm,
online. Um, you see it, when I go overseas in different spaces, there is, graffiti that is, sort of hip hop themed graffiti. So in so many different ways, the culture that is hip hop has communicated across so many other cultures and maybe found some resonance in those spaces where some portion of the communities maybe feel that sense of being unheard or not visible enough and creating your own spaces for telling your stories. And I wonder how many are there other things like that that we see folks doing. And I guess Black Lives Matter was one of these kinds of it's a social innovation that took off across the globe in a lot of ways. So there's probably lots of different ways in which people from our communities have already created those kinds of innovations. Um, I know we have about, 5 minutes left, so if anybody wants to ask another question or if somebody wants to share a comment, something is resonating with them or resonated with them throughout this conversation, um, I'll read it aloud. I'm especially appreciating Clinton's point about the comparative relevance of imposter syndrome, more at PWIs, less at HBCUs, and how that might affect learners' risk taking and agency in the work world. Thank you, Dr. McClendon, for your seed observations and how context so matters. Just scrolling up, looking for other things. Seemed like there was some conversation earlier about dividends, but um, we can take one more question or one more comment. I hope folks are enjoying this experience. We have a lot more coming. Um, I want to thank everyone for their insightful comments and questions in the chat and um, my heartfelt gratitude goes to Dr. Natasha McClendon. Natasha, thank you for sharing your profound insights with us. Today's conversation was, a great opening for a month of conversation starters for a year-long journey to find those intersections of art, Afrofuturism, and geography that'll help us design an equitable and feminist future. And when we say conversation starters, we really mean that. So some of the things that we started talking about today, we hope that you all are going to take into your conversations in your smaller subsets of our community, in the spaces that you work in the spaces that you enjoy. Most importantly, thank you for all of the work that you do, Natasha, in Black higher education to help Black families thrive. Because ultimately, getting the right kind of education that'll position you for the right kind of career or entrepreneurial venture will set the stage for how you're able to thrive. And the work that you're doing will touch Black families in ways that are really meaningful. For folks in the audience, don't forget to join us for our upcoming events. We've got so much more in the series. Each conversation promises to be as enriching as today's, and yet in its own way. I see there's a comment in the chat. For grad school, I attended a PWI very close to an HBCU. It's gone now. I can't see it. I'll put it back. The only reason I didn't attend an HBCU was that my major was not offered as a degree program. Are you aware of how or where the public can make the demand known? Interesting. And have you come across any studies that have looked at GIS programs at HBCUs? Off the top of my head, the only one I can think of is Tennessee State University. We should actually share the list of HBCUs that have geography, geospatial, or GIS programming. North Star is definitely committed to helping HBCUs grow that capacity. We've got 4 HBCUs that we work with, most of them that we partner with on a number of initiatives, uh, most of which have a geography or geospatial program, already had one, and one we were trying to nurture the creation of. And I'm volunteering via North Star to provide an intro to GIS course at Howard University this semester, and our that course will not just share fundamental GIS skills, but also um, the compelling case for why GIS work should be done with a racial equity focus. And we're excited to take content like that and help replicate it to other organizations and just help these HBCUs that are already doing a great job in terms of geospatial, GIS, and digital geography, help amplify that work and spread those opportunities out to other folks. Um, I want to, just say as we celebrate Black History Month and the impact of Black people all year long, again, let's carry this conversation forward. Let's carry conversations like this forward and inspire the kind of change and growth that we need in our communities that may have to happen in our own institutions, even as we are compelling partners and potential allies in other institutions to bring their best. So thank you once again for your presence and for your engagement tonight in the chat, in the comments, and Dr. McClendon on stage. We look forward to seeing all of you at our next event. So happy Black History Month, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.